before we do start, I mean, you can still record it, no problem, is I wondered if you could pray for me, or, I mean, because I'd like to make sure that God is involved with this and not just my will and my over enthusiasm or whatever. You know, I'd like to make sure that this is, I'm led by my spirit or the spirit, not by my emotions or my feelings, because I'd hate to do that, and I'd like to have prayer on that, if you don't mind. Would you be able to do that?
I would love to do that. So for those of you who are just joining us on the recording, we're going to continue our discussion of issues connected to evolution and creation. Tonight, Kevin will be leading us, and we're very thankful for that. And before he leads, I'm just going to lead us in prayer for Kevin. So let's all turn our hearts to the Lord, and we'll lift this time up and Kevin up before the Lord in prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful time we have to continue learning about a subject that I confess, Lord, I don't know a whole lot about. And Lord, as you stretch us, as you sharpen our understanding of the issues, as you deepen our faith through these discussions, would you give wisdom and love to Kevin and to all of us, so that, Lord, as he teaches and as we listen and as we respond, that this would be an edifying discussion. Lord, we're excited about Kevin and the time he's taken to prepare. We're excited about the information he shared in the link last week to us. And Lord, we're just looking forward to a profitable discussion. And so would you lead and guide Kevin in every way so that your words are led by him? We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So I'm excited, brother.
Okay, so yeah, we're going to keep it to simple English, Desma. Don't worry. In fact, I'm not going to be mentioning much of scientific experiments, too much. So first, before I even start, we're going to have a little quiz, because it kind of comes into my talk, and I don't want to influence anybody in any way with the answer that you're going to give, each one of you now, on this question. So it's going to be a little quiz, everybody. You don't have to answer in secret. You can answer out loud, because you don't have to know the answer. It's only really what you think. So the question is this. And as I said, you don't have to know the answer. What you think is the answer. So in the Western world, we're going to talk about the developed countries of what do you think is the source of most people's intake of calcium? And it's obviously a simple question, but I just want to hear the answer. And if you know two sources.
Okay, milk and maybe eggs.
Okay, milk and eggs. Let me just write that down. Okay.
Milk and eggs.
Milk and eggs, he said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to say vegetables and maybe meat.
I think in the Asian diet, it would be green vegetables.
In the developed countries. I'm not talking English.
Well, Taiwan's developed. People don't drink
but
as much. They're drinking more milk here now, but that's a Western influence.
That's true. So what are your two?
In the West, it's dairy products, cheese and
dairy, okay,
milk and stuff.
Okay.
Yogurt, whatever.
Yeah. And then Pastor Tim.
I would say milk and red meat.
Okay.
Spinach, cheese, broth.
So spinach and what's the other? There's just two. The spinach and what one?
Cheese.
Milk.
Or if just no one is okay.
Cheese. I don't know. Milk, cheese.
I would say vegetables, water.
Water, is it? Okay.
Mineral water.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We can move on. That will come later. So what I wanted to do is do introduction first, but before I even do that, I'm going to go through what are we going to go through tonight. And there's no way that I can finish everything tonight, but we will do this, I hope. First of all, I'm going to let you know why I am here speaking in front of you. What gives me the right to be here? If I do have a right, am I qualified? Do I have any credentials? What is my motivation? What is my intention? Am I here just to bang out my point and prove something and or whatever. What is my motivation? Because it's going to be important for you to want to come next week or not. If my motivation is wrong, why would you? So that's number one. You'll hear that. Number two, you're going to see practically why we can't rely on science. Why we can't rely on science. Okay, I'll put a little thing at the end there. We can't rely on science alone. And I'll be sharing that with you. Three, you're going to learn 3 words, what must be said before, or you must understand before any learning can take place, before any learning can happen. Now, just to give you a clue on that, we pray like we've just prayed. Christians pray for help. Whenever a pastor goes up to preach, they normally pray, give me the words from you rather than me. That's part of it. But what are the 3 words? Well, I won't be asking you. I'll be letting you know what the 3 words you must have or in your mind and accepted before any learning can happen. Okay, so that's be exciting. This is after 15 years of personal development and 10 years of being a Christian. Number 4, what the relationship between science and God, what the relationship of science and God, what is the relationship between science and God, and evolution and creationism and God, and should be, and if God should be involved. That's a question we'll be looking at and discussing. And just a fun one here, anything that is satisfied is over, it's finished. So if you're satisfied with your marriage, it's over. Okay, that'll be a little discussion as well. Number 6, then I'm going to give you a summary of next week of what we're going to be talking about. And it's going to be a little bit more in depth, but on top of that, after the summary, I'm actually going to give you the conclusion, or my conclusion, of the talk next week, even before we talk about it. So you're going to get the result of our discussion next week. So you're going to know who killed Mrs. Marple in the kitchen with a candlestick. You'll actually know you'll have seen the you'll know the conclusion before we even talk about it. And so that would be exciting. And we're going to solve it without any scientific experiment. So that's what we've got tonight. So it's quite a lot. But let me go through my introduction first. And so I'm going to let you know why am I here today, what gives me the right to actually talk on this subject. It's important. Well, the first thing is, I want to thank Pastor Tim and actually Martin for bringing this to the forefront, because when I became a Christian in 2009, I think it was, I was over 50 years old, of course, in my mid-50s. And so I had a whole life of conscious and unconscious sinning. And when I gave my life and submitted to our Lord, something happened to me. My mind kind of exploded. It was just a relapse of the whole things I'd done. It just kept on coming at me all the time. And so over the next 1 year, 2 years, even 3 years, I was thinking of things. Oh, I forgot that one, Lord, forgive me for that as well. And I forgot that one, Lord, forgive me that one as well. So I mentally listed everything out on that first day, and my mind was full of it. And so I was basically being convicted and needed just to let it over to the Lord, let it over to our God, which was a good thing. It felt really good. And so it was after about 3 years that I finished that list. I mean, on the first day, it was quite a long time. And then little bit by little bit, it was slowly coming out. So that's important from what I'm going to say right now, because there was something there. I'm not sure if everybody has this feeling when you think you've got everything to go on a trip and you've forgotten something. It's that feeling that I've forgotten something, but I got to leave now. Or if you owe someone some money or they owe you some money, it's you don't forget it. There's something there. If you have forgotten about it, there's something there that is niggling your mind that you know you've forgotten something. Does anybody relate with that at all? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So that was my feeling when I became a Christian, and even after 4 years, after all these things that I'd given up and asked for forgiveness for, there was still something that was niggling, and I couldn't get it. So it was just forgotten. And then I went home for the first time. It was actually after three or so years, and I went home for the first time as a Christian. And my mum's a Christian, of course, and she was praying for me for 15 years to become a Christian. And so I went home and I met Mum, you know, and that was the first time we'd spoken face to face. We had a great time. Ian, my brother, and their family had left to America to see their son get married, and I had really my own time with Mum. Wonderful time. And it was when Andy Murray won the Wimbledon Championship as well. So even better. But at that time, I decided to go and clean out the house. And as I was cleaning out the house, or cleaning Mum's stuff, Mum had hundreds and hundreds of books, literally everywhere, about the Bible or about stories of the Bible, and even more magazines and publications. So I started to tidy things up. I'd open a drawer, get everything out, and start filtering it out. And at that time, I came across, now remember, at this time, I hadn't, in those 3 years of being a Christian in Jakarta and Bali, I had not studied Genesis. I knew nothing about evolution, except from what I'd learned at school was a fact, because they teach it as fact in schools, the fact that we come from apes, you know, or monkeys and apes and then man. So that's what I believe was true. I didn't study evolution. I didn't study biology. I couldn't stand biology, cutting up those and getting, I didn't like it, but I loved science, and I'll go into that in a minute. So what was I saying? Oh, yes. So remember, I hadn't studied the Bible. I didn't know what the Bible said about it, except, you know, everybody knows that God made the heaven and the earth, but I didn't understand it. So we'd never studied it at church in those 3 years. So that was my learning. And I'd been cleaning up stuff in the house, and I came across a whole plethora of literature on evolution, or more importantly, why evolution was ridiculed. And I said, this is ridiculous. We come from apes. Evolution, it must be evolution. We're told it's true. I mean, school, you know, teachers have told us that this is true. What are we saying here? And it was it was all scientific publications with all the science and all the references to science books and everything. And it was all debunking evolution. And I was sick. I couldn't believe it, but I read it all. I was enthralled with it all. I deep dived, because I'm a scientist. I'm a real scientist. My first job was a scientist. I'll explain that in a second. And so I devoured this stuff, and I just, Mum's house did not get cleaned up after that. I couldn't stop studying this and making notes and reading about evolution and also creationism. So, and why these people were saying this, and it was all in scientific leaflets and literature. So I took those back to Bali with me, brought them back to Bali with me, because I'd already moved to Bali by that time from Jakarta. And over the next year, I studied this evolution versus creationism. I put more hours, I'm estimating this, I put more hours into that study than I had in the structures subject when I did civil engineering, a civil engineering 4-year degree. So I did a lot of study on this, not experiments, but study on what was being said over the years. And I was actually a little bit shocked. Well, let me share with you. After that year, all things sort of happened in my Christian life. And of course, I got married at the same time, at that time. And this folder, or this information over the years got lost. And I moved back to UK at one time for a year or 7 months. We moved from this house, and we that's when Kiki and Kevin rented our place out, and we had to put a lot of stuff in storage, and the rats got in the storage, and the rain got in the storage, and someone else was getting the boxes out and moving things. I just thought this stuff had just been lost. I gave up looking for it. And then we had 2 or 3, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we started talking about this in the Bible study, and I really stumbled across it. I looked for it at first and I couldn't find it. But if you look at my house, I've got boxes everywhere on like racking system. And I went through every single box, every single suitcase, looking for some other stuff and actually making a content list. And I found it a week after we started. Remember, Pastor Tim, I phoned you up and I said, I found this stuff.
You found your notes.
I found my notes and all the literature, and it all came flooding back to me, my study. And it's probably the reason, and I'm going to share with you number 3, is it now? What the 3 words must be before we can learn anything. And I automatically overrode that on the first week, and that's why I apologized the second week, because what happened was that first week, I was a little bit in shock because I wasn't expecting, it was against my expectation. So I was a little bit expecting when I hadn't realized the framing of the talk properly. I hadn't understood it. And so I was a little bit of shock, and I overrode those 3 words, and I was not learning. I was not listening. And that's why on the second week, I'd found my notes, and not just that, nothing to do with the notes being found, but I realized that I had to, if I was going to learn anything from this discussion, I would have to say these 3 words. Now, of course, we do pray about that as well. But those 3 words, when I did many years of personal development before I became a Christian, of course, I was chasing something at the end of the day. I spent many years, spent about $20,000 on going around the world, meeting Tony Robbins, meeting Brian Tracy and Deepak Chopra, all these people that were wonderful philosophers and wonderful thinkers and leaders in their field. I had a wonderful time, learned a lot about myself. And one of the things that we really learned and proved through systematic checking was if we don't say the 3 magic words, we cannot learn. Our subconscious will not allow the brain to understand or even listen. Those 3 words are, I don't know. And I'll never forget this. I remember being in church with the guy next to me in the church before COVID, a long time ago. And every time a sermon came up, he said, "Oh, I know this. And I said, "Yeah, but you've got to listen to learn something." And he just said, "Yeah, but I know that. Oh, yeah, I know that as well." And so what he's doing, or what we do, and the same has happened to me many times, is we forget that. Then what we're hearing is sifted, is filtered through our filters of everything that we know is pointed out to us, and we're confirming it. And everything we don't know, we don't even listen to. We don't even learn anything. We're not geared for learning. So it's very important for us to say those 3 words, or mentally, or in prayer, and ask the Lord to reveal us to the truth. Because those 3 words of being aware of we don't know are very, very important to our subconscious. And I urge everybody to do that, as I have to remind myself all the time as well.
Yeah, I think we don't always have to know everything about God.
Correct. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah. But have I said that? If I said that, or you understood that from what I said? If that is, it's a mistake.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I believe that it's good to go in with an open mind. That's what you're saying, aren't you?
Yes. Yes. Say that we don't know everything.
Some things I believe we won't know until the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, Kevin, I find this very interesting because I've had to say to 2 people in the last week, you don't know what you don't know. And this is what I encounter all the time is people think they know when they don't know. So if they would start from a standpoint of saying, I don't know, then they would end up knowing. But because they they start from a standpoint where they think they know, and I think that standpoint of I think I know often can be prejudice. You know, the person can be operating out of pride and prejudice. And I'm glad you said this, because when it comes to this particular topic, when people ask me specific questions, did the snake actually talk? Was it a snake like we know the snake that I played with at the reptile exhibition a few days ago? I say, I don't know. I'm not completely sure. Is it a personification of Satan and a snake or what? So there's some things about Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and there's a lot about evolution where I can truly say from the heart, I don't know. So I find these conversations stimulating because I'm learning a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah. Also, we all have our biases, whether they're conscious or unconscious, and I think that's what you meant by prejudice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And on that point, let's go through that point. I see it's in part of my talk tonight. On that point, you can have two people both brought up in the same family, both brought up in the same conditions. I'm not going to be talking about twins because they're a very special type, but even twins as well. But both brought up with the same values, even everything the same parents, you know, brought up in a normal family, a life, and they could read two things. And this is the beauty of science as well, as Martin has already alluded to or said in the last couple of weeks. You read two things. He reads this piece and he reads the same piece. Both of them read the same piece. And after they've read it, what's happening is when this person reads it, when A reads it, the points that he, as you've already said, Pastor Tim, and is the points that subconsciously that he agrees with or biased to will be kind of confirming, and it will be pointing out, it'll be coming forward in the text. And the stuff that is not so that towards his way or biased will be suppressed. And the same with the other. Let's say that A comes up and B is suppressed, and B or number two, A is suppressed and B comes up, and then they discuss it. And A says to B, number one says number two, hey, I found this. And the other guy will say, well, hey, that's very interesting. I didn't understand that. I saw this actually, but what you're saying makes sense now. Yeah. And so, or could make sense. And then the other person said, well, I didn't see that as well. So there we have a learning. We have now the whole text being learned by these two people. And that's exactly what we do at Bible study. It's fascinating that sometimes we can come up with a question that's way off field, but it's relevant. And so everybody can bring something to it or sees different things. It's just fantastic. I love that type of thing. And of course, that's what science is. Science is, as Martin has said, all these disciplines coming together to confirm or affirm these principles, these experiments that are going on. They all come together and they each sees different things and say, yeah, but what about this? Okay. And then they tick it off and say that hypothesis is on board. And that's what science is or should be. And it's self-reflecting, it's self-correcting. It's a beautiful thing. Science is a wonderful thing. And that's the next step in it's still the introduction, by the way. But before I go on, anybody, any more questions?
I'm just very curious about like when people say that our world or Earth has been like existed for like millions of years. So is that true? That's still like my question.
Yeah, we'll be getting to that.
Yeah, because like when I read like something scientific, you know, like almost all those sources say that, oh, it's a million years, like our Earth's already million years, and even the fossils. And in Java, I mean, since I was in school, they also taught us that, oh, there's like a fossil found in Java, like it's the Homo erectus. It's like very famous fossil. So well, I didn't really know about it, but that's what the school always taught us.
Yeah.
But when I was in school, I also gained a huge interest in biology, actually. So, but I didn't like learn deeply about it. But yeah, I had like interest in biology back then. So,
Okay.
well, I'm learning. I want to learn more too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll be actually talking more about that next week. Well, I'll try to reach it this week, but I doubt if we'll reach it this week. But I'm going to allude to it this week as well.
You just said how wonderful science is.
Yes.
And I have to admit that I'm a little bit addicted to science. And what I recognized about science at first, we have too many specialists, and someone who is good in biology doesn't know much about the weather, and someone who is an agrarian doesn't know much about the soil. You know, we have too many specialists, and they are too specialized on their own field, and therefore many of the scientists of today and sciences actually fail their approach by specializing too much and not communicating to other sciences. And there is a big risk of our approach of knowledge of today. And I recognize especially about history, archaeology, and I like to watch documentaries. And it's really important from when is this documentary? Is it 2 years or 3 years old? Knowledge is changing so fast right now. Yeah, we know right now about Göbekli Tepe. Now they found a temple who's even 1,000 years older. Beside Göbekli Tepe, then there's Dwarka, what is 12,000 years old. It's changing all the time. And right now it might be conspiracy. And until public sciences are talking about everything is just conspiracy, and information becomes science or knowledge, and there is a really slight fading into, and we don't know anymore what's true and what's fact and what is just information. And I think we need to approach our own, we need to overthink our own approach to knowledge, how we consume knowledge.
Yeah. Well, that's the exact reason why we cannot rely on science alone. We just can't, because of because human beings are involved in science. And that's why I asked you that question at the beginning, and we're going to be talking about. So yeah, I agree with you, but knowledge changes all the time because we're learning more data. More data comes in, so our hypothesis has to change. That's why, as Martin was saying last week, that there's frontiers where we don't know. In fact, if we haven't been in that generation, we don't know, and it's not fact. But the tragedy is, and this is a tragedy, which I believe is the reason why I'm up here and I'm speaking, is because the tragedy is that it's taught as fact in our education system. It is taught that the Big Bang Theory actually happened. And if you read it, it's like a fairy tale. It doesn't make sense to any scientist, but the scientists have not the real scientists wouldn't put that in as fact, but there is a marketing arm to this atheism. There's a marketing arm, and they are the really what I would sort of call fanatic. This is my belief, by the way. There's a marketing arm to the, I call it a marketing arm because I'm a marketer, and they're pushing out. The normal scientists are really not. They're interested in science, so they're not. They expect the establishment to put this out to the schools. And what's happened over the last 150, 160, even 200 years is, because evolution didn't start with Darwin, I hope we know that. And what's happened is that the fanatical board of the atheism world will get any chance to put it in. Now that's my opinion, but it's happened. It really is true that these are put in as facts in the schools. And I am so grateful that I was not interested in biology at school. I didn't get into those classrooms. I know I was taught, as we all are, some stage when I was a little kid of 4 years old or 5 years old, in very formative years, we are told by the authoritative figure of our lives, which is what? Parents or teachers or doctors. And if they say something to us, we kind of believe it. We haven't got a sifting process at that time. And so it's very, very, very difficult for us to leave that later on in our lives. And that's why there's a automatic bias when we go into study anything. And it's a huge, huge problem. And I believe it's the reason for a lot of lost people in this world. But yeah, I agree. Knowledge is changing, which means the data is changing, which means what? The science is being updated as we go along, which means science is not fact. Much of science. Sorry, Desma, yeah.
I believe that forever researchers have needed funding, and once money came into it, evil came into science. The opening for evil, because wherever there's money to be made, sometimes evil people are there with.
Absolutely, and that's actually going to be my next topic. Yeah,
I would agree. It's property. Money is just a tool to handle property. So the moment we harvested more grain than we can consume, we had to store. And if we have more harvest, then we can actually start to exchange to other goods with our neighbors. And to make it more easy, then the money came in. But to protect our property.
Well, it's really it's what you're saying is money is still, or wealth of something is still that the greed. Anyway, I agree. It's money is property. Property is money. You know.
I do have one kind of clarifying question, because Kevin, from some of your statements, in my mind, it seems like you're setting up this kind of argument that there's a lot of atheism mixed in with the science, which invalidates it, and then is like a threat to people becoming Christians.
Yes.
But what if Christians have no problem with the science? Does that invalidate that argument, or is it just like certain types of like ideologies behind the science, like materialism or, you know, atheism?
Yeah.
Like,
okay, well,
those ideologies behind the science itself that are the problem? Are you saying the science is the problem? Or are you saying that you can't separate the science from the ideologies?
Yeah, okay, well, that's a good point. I think someone else alluded to it just a minute ago, is that once we have a belief, it's very, very difficult to lose that belief. And so it does come into play, absolutely, within science. Right now, this is also next week, but there's been a really big update from 10 years ago till now. 10 years ago when I studied evolution and creationism, up to now, which I didn't know about. until Sunday night. And so I started to, after I'd done my talk and prepared this, I went and say, okay, what's happened since 10 years ago? And what we found, or what I found, was there were astrophysicists, and these guys are nerdical on science, and their heart for science overrides their heart for atheism. And a lot of these astrophysicists are atheists in the sense that they don't believe in God. They're not agnostic. Agnostic is my definition, or my belief is they don't believe in God and they don't disbelieve in God. They just don't know, and they're looking for the answer. So, but atheists who do not believe in God, some of them totally reject it aggressively, some of them don't. They're now coming out with their hands in surrender, and I'll be showing you some scientific evidence of this, and naming them as well, and showing you stuff of this, that they're coming out in quite a number and saying, okay, we're scientists at heart, and I can't ignore this anymore. I'm not saying I believe in God, they say, but there's been an intellectual intervention somewhere which we cannot explain, and we cannot explain by millions of years. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week. But I am saying that, yes, Martin, that, or is it Philip? Philip Lamb.
Oh, it's Martin.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I think though it's a little bit dangerous to make those kinds of statements, because you have to know the ideological biases of all of the major contributors and testers and all this stuff. And I do think a lot more people are agnostic more than they're atheistic. Like, I guess atheistic is just kind of like another word for people who are very, very, very very, very believe it's highly improbable there's a God, but they're not sure, of course, because it's not really testable, right? That's the irony of it is you can't falsify whether God exists or not. So that's why most scientists who are just pure scientists are kind of they often say they're agnostic or deistic or something like that. That's more kind of general and not like so certain about anything, right?
Okay, I would actually disagree with that on this point, and that is because we are the same. You're a scientist, you believe in God, so but there's no proof of God. So right. What I'm saying is, what I'm saying is the other way around should be the case as well. I'm a Christian, I'm also a scientist, and I believe in God, but I can't test if God is true. So I'm not agnostic. I believe in God, and that is the reason we're coming up to that very soon, actually. So I will be doing more explaining on this. So I believe that God has to be involved in science. Otherwise, you're going to get lost completely in science, because God is there, and he says he's there because he talks about the creation. He talks about him involved in that science. And that's why it's so important. Sorry, Desma.
Yeah, agree.
Oh, okay. So I do a little bit disagree with you, and I don't think we need to know all the different aspects of science or what they're thinking, etc. It doesn't matter, because
I mean in order to make the statement that there's an inseparable atheistic ideology behind a lot of the science interpretation. Like, I'm saying, in order to make that statement, you have to be sure that
I see. Okay.
It's actually
true. I agree with that, because we don't know if they are really not believing in God or whether they're halfway.
Because there were a lot of scientists who believed in God who made lots of contributions to evolutionary theory and all the different sciences. So
okay.
Possibly I would recommend that we get to the issues. It's, in order to get published and be taken as a scientist, you have to use the tools of science, okay? Doesn't matter what you believe, if you believe in the tools of science, which is rationality, experimentation, all that. So rather than evaluate what everyone believes, we should probably just get into the heart of the matter. What are the differences? What are the issues? Now,
Okay, so-
with that said, and forget the psychology for now. I think what happens is when people go to teach it, a lot of teachers are not mathematicians, they're not scientists. They teach it perhaps wrong. Perhaps our own understanding is very shaky, and this is why we're having these discussions. I don't think people that teach it actually may be even teaching it right, so they might just say, oh, it's a theory. I mean, it's not a theory, it's fact. But the truth is they don't understand what it means to say it's a theory. So please continue with the actual issues, and then we can decide.
Well, I'm going to do that, but I need to put the background in first, if you don't mind. And let me just discuss that with you. Yes, we're using tools, and we use the same tools. So let's get that straight first, is that scientists, they grow up together, whether they're atheists, agnostics, or strong, active against God, or they're just agnostics or believers. They all are classmates in university. They grow up together, they're classmates, they're bedmates, roommates. They're in the same universities, they go to the same labs, they're working together, they're using the same tools, the same experimentations. There's no creationist scientists in one part of the world using secret labs, and there's no atheists in another side, or evolutionists in another side, and it's just not happening. They're all together. And then they go down a little path, and some are only scientists who are looking for the best rate of return of milk from a cow, and say they probably don't really need to go to the origins. Those kind of scientists, the scientists that are looking at the resistivity of the sap in the plant, these are inside, and they don't need to go to evolution to work out what they need to do. That's what I'm going to come to now. My love for science is, I just love science. When I was at school, I didn't want to do the biology. I did the other type of science. We built a hovercraft, and we worked out all the science and everything else, and long story. But my first job was an assistant scientific officer. And this is relevant right now because I'm going to show you about hypothesis and things. My first job was an assistant. I left school at 16. I did not do A-levels. I went to work as an assistant scientific officer in the Department of Environment at Oxford, and worked on and they gave me a white coat, and I had a big tank, and they said, look, we need to know. I was basically a glorified data collector for them. You can do that on a computer now. But we had a tank, and I had water coming through this tank, and I had to work out, if I put stones over there in the tank, how far the silt would come up, and would that obstruct the construction of the Thames Barrier? I don't know whether you know the Thames Barrier in Woolwich in London. And this was 6 years before it was built. And so they had to have data of the velocity, the height of the silt, the density, all that kind of stuff. And so what I would do, go in every morning, and I would set up the system exactly as it was the day before, and the hypothesis was there. And where did we get that hypothesis from? Where do scientists get that hypothesis from? They get it from, well, now they can get it from their creative mind. You can make up anything you like, and there's got to be some truth to it, because you're actually making it from the mind. And you can't make it from the mind that's something you don't relate it to. So in the real world of science, the best kind of concepts, the concept comes first, the conceptualization, whatever you call that, there's another word for that, and then the hypothesis. And that was what Darwin was brilliant at. Darwin wasn't really a scientist. He never made a scientific experiment in his life. And his book doesn't even mention any science whatsoever, no scientific experiments whatsoever in his book. It's purely based on, what's the word? You just mentioned it, Barb.
Observational science.
Observational, yeah. He was called the
observation.
He was called the armchair scientist. So what was the philosopher? He was a philosopher. Philosophers can observe something and then make up a theory. And so this concept, he was brilliant at concepts. And from that, you make a hypothesis. And that's what I was doing at the hydraulics research station. I was making a concept. And from that concept, or I didn't make it. And from that, we've made a hypothesis of all these things that need to be in place. And then we'd look for results and change that to get the different results and make sure that it was what we wanted with the different KPIs, which is key performance indicators. And from there, does that help you at all?
I'm lost.
Well, I think what you're saying is that Darwin wasn't an experimental scientist, a biological. He wasn't like an evolutionary experimental scientist. He didn't have the genetics data and tools that we have
Yeah,
now.
that's right. Yeah.
He made a lot of observations and collected a lot of species. So he was a scientist who was like heavily involved with data collection on existing species and just a lot of data collection, right?
So was biased. Darwin also was biased by his family and by his he had a motivation to prove his theory, right?
Absolutely, that's what man does.
So
I hate to say this, but people that just say, well, God created it, they don't go after how it was created. They just go, yeah, God created it. So people that maybe had an axe to grind about where we come from, I can see where they would be motivated. Because if you just settle for the common understanding or I'm not arguing against God created the world and the universe, but I mean, if I had a choice of going to the top doctor who was an atheist versus a mediocre doctor who believed, believe me, I would go to the atheist. The thing is, we should get to the issues, okay? And we're starting to. We're talking about observational science and inference from those pieces of data, observational data. That is science.
Yeah.
Where it leads and how you interpret it, okay, we should get into that. But why don't we get into the issues?
There's a reason for that, and I'll come to it. Yeah, but we're getting there a little bit faster. So yeah, I agree that that Christians make the same mistakes. Absolutely, they are biased, and they'll just say. And I've witnessed testimonies of Christians that, wow, they are just saying things because they can't understand something. So the Bible says this, so that's it. And so I agree, it works both ways. And I found this when I was studying creation and evolution, when I didn't know the Bible at that time. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I was just a Christian, just a Christian, who didn't know all the Bible, and certainly didn't know what God said about creation. So I agree with you. There's a motivation both ways. Darwin was a Christian when he started out to the Galapagos Islands. In halfway through the trip, he denounced and rejected God. So he was an atheist and had problems with the theories of creationism, but he was an observational scientist. You're right, Martin. That's probably a great title for him. He was an observational scientist. So he looked at things and then imagined some great, concepts. And then
I thought Darwin was agnostic. I didn't know he was.
No. He was absolutely denounced God in his book. If you read his book, he actually says there, he blames God for all the pain and suffering of the mutation, and he blames it all on God. And he walked away directly from God, totally turned his back on him. And so his concepts and his ideas were already based on what I believe were flawed. If you have a concept that doesn't involve God, it is flawed, whether it's science or not. And that's why we're always taught, you go to the book of the Bible to find out what the truth is. Now, we were talking about how to read the Bible before, and that's another discussion we can have maybe now, if we want to, because I believe that we don't need to be a scientist to understand the Bible, but we need to have common sense. And I don't believe we have to question God and ask, okay, so when I say don't have to believe question, we can't just blindly say this is what it means. If God says he breathed life in for life. And I really want to do this properly, though. I want to get it to properly because I just don't want to get into an argument for, against, and experiments there, because it's been going on for 150 years. That's exactly the problem. Why is it? Let's ask this question. Why is it that science can't come to agreement, for goodness sake, on this one topic? Most other sciences, you know, about we can't understand the cause, really understand gravity, is agreed. We can't really understand certain things, and we do understand so many things. Many things in science are commonly agreed by everybody. But
Look,
this
I
topic,
don't-
why
I
can't we agree?
I don't want to pick apart what you're saying, Kevin. I get what you're saying, but according to what you're saying, I have to look at each of my medications and go, okay, which one of these was developed by a Christian?
By a Christian, and which one wasn't?
Yeah.
Christian pharmaceutical company.
That's a very different subject, as I said, because that does not include the origins of science, the origins of the world. As I said, we are right. We are so in agreement with many things, chemistry and drugs and everything. I don't particularly agree with the philosophy of a lot of the drugs, and how they minister them. But you're right. If I had to go to a surgeon who was a specialist in, like my surgeon who took my prostate out, he wasn't a Christian. I'm not looking for Christians all the time. I'm looking for qualified people. But in this case, in the case of the origins, where you've got this frontier science, and then you've got man with its biasness, its greed, and I'm going to go into that in a minute, actually, and with everything else, same as the Christian scientists, don't get me wrong, Christian science have got things wrong because of their belief as well, and we're going to go into that. But I want to go into it properly, Mark, because this has been going on for 150 years, and I want to put the groundwork in so that people can understand why this has happened. And that's why I'm laboring a little bit on this, because, and it's going to have to be next week when we get really into the depths of it, because I don't want to go through another 150 years.
Okay, wait, stop. We need to clarify some things.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that everybody understands what's the key issue. Are you trying to say that because Darwin wasn't a Christian, that therefore he had an agenda in his science? That's my first question.
Okay, I'll answer that, and other people can answer it from their own perspective as well. But I believe, yes, when he walked away from God, he was definitely affected. That will automatically affect his decisions, his observations. Of course it will. 100%. I cannot see that being argued against. What someone has to explain to me, why is it so clear to me that if he is walked away from God, how can that not affect? How can you have the right you get the right hypothesis if you leave God out of the equation? How can that happen? How can that be right?
Well, if we're talking about measuring bird beaks and what we're understanding, then why does God have to be in the middle of the measuring of bird beaks?
Because he wasn't talking about just adaptation. I'm not talking about adaptation. You call it natural selection. I would rather call it adaptation.
We're getting to it. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin, we just described Darwin as being an observational scientist.
Yeah.
And now you're trying to make him into a philosophical agendaizer. And
Yes.
I'm not seeing the connection. You haven't
Okay.
established this.
To be fair, Darwin did talk about, he did address a wide array of arguments, kind of, he was thinking a lot about the kinds of arguments that people would be bringing to him against his origin on the origin of species book. So yes, Darwin was an observational scientist. He wrote hypotheses and theories that kind of went to the edges and beyond of his observations. So that is correct. I think though it's kind of difficult because the further we get away from the present and the most rigorously testable, observable, reproducible types of science, the more uncertainty there is, right? So, and then the more potential margins for error or missing information or lack of ability to reproduce experiment, right? So the further we get away from,
That's the Bible all about. The Bible is in the present, or let's say it's not written in the present, but it's still a living book and you can still apply it to the present.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong. So are you saying that the question that science hasn't been able to conclusively agree on is like the origin of species, like, or the existence of God, or what was the?
Okay, so yeah, the science has not been able to, of course, conclude. We cannot test scientifically if God exists.
Right.
We cannot
Right.
conclude scientifically if the pool of chemicals that we came from ever happened.
Right. We don't have a time machine. We haven't.
No, exactly.
We haven't. The theory's not complete.
So we can agree on that.
We don't have all the data.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that still would have to be done to verify a lot of the
Yeah,
edges of things.
sure.
Yeah.
So going back to the science in the schools, which I am motivated to go out and make sure that this doesn't happen all the time. That's another story. But teachers are just relaying what's in the science books written down by the specialists and the experts, and they put it as fact, Bob. It's not the teachers. The teachers might be bad teachers, but it's actually written in the textbooks as fact. And that is a tragedy of justice.
No, wait, stop. Okay. Here's the problem
In my
I'm
opinion.
having with this discussion. Okay.
Yeah.
It's we have to be very exacting about what we're talking about, especially when we're negating something. Okay. Because last week we talked about how evolution had 4 distinct elements. And one is a belief about how the created matter came into existence. One is a belief about how species developed from other species. And related to that, a third aspect we dealt with was whether or not human beings are descended from apes. In other words, was my grandparent, my great grandmother, a Cro-Magnon or a Neanderthal? So when we talk about these things, we have to be clear about which aspect of evolution are we challenging and saying was based upon flawed science. Are you saying Darwin's observations about adaptation of a species was not scientific, or his science was flawed because he was a non-Christian? Or are you saying that if he posits then from adaptation of a species to the fact that humans descended from primate apes, or that we all descended from a single cell being, that he's gone too far and that's not scientific and we don't have the science to prove it? So I'm trying to find out specifically, what is your beef?
Okay. So that's a good observation, because I've got out of sync of my notes, that's why. But yes, I'm not saying that Darwin is wrong on the fuzzy, on the exact observations he saw within the scientific realm of that day, which was the adaptation or the variations he observed. Yes, but to say it came from one cell, that's out of our knowledge, that's out of his knowledge and out of our knowledge. That's going back to the origins.
Did he say that in his book?
Yes, he said that the birds. No, he speculated with his I can never forget the word. Never remember the science. He speculated, saying that, well, what if? And he did say what if. He didn't say it was true. That's one thing, which is good. He said, what if this had come from a single cell and we're all related? And then he started to make, and then he made the famous I Think cartoon of what if we came from all one, and then he branched out onto things, which is pure, wonderful concept, a wonderful concept for science to start on a hypothesis. But the problem was that it went from hypothesis, from in his own writing, went from hypothesis without any scientific study, boom, to the conclusion. And that's what he did. And then science came in and tried to make sure that was correct. That's
And
the way
so when
I'm
you say
reading it.
he went from there to evolution, do you mean that?
No, I didn't say to evolution. I said to a conclusion.
Oh, sorry.
Which included one of those was evolution. Yes,
Okay.
he already believed in evolution, because evolution he did not make up.
Which aspect of evolution are you saying that he came to the conclusion? The aspect that humans descended from primates, or the fact, or the conjecture that everything stemmed from a one-celled being in a primordial swamp? Which
that one, the one that's from the single cell, everything comes from them, and they have different branches, and they put them into different sections to show that one came from the other. And then, of course, the human section came from apes. Yes. So he made that as a concept. What a brilliant mind. He was a brilliant mind. And he was a philosopher.
Well, I think there's a concluding sentence to his book on the theory of natural selection, which he doesn't conclusively say what started the life and whether it started in a single form or multiple forms.
Okay.
I don't think he was being like certain in his conclusion. Like he had to make some kind of conclusion.
He always said if, and I think.
But yeah.
So that's fair enough.
Well, I think that he didn't have to have the whole picture, and if he was wrong on parts of it, other parts of it, like natural selection, have actually played out as what happens with
that. Yeah.
Once scientists got the tools and started looking at DNA and things like that, it's shown that changes can happen. I mean, his big contribution was creation is not static. That in the Bible it looks like it is, but in Genesis, Genesis doesn't go into detail and say, well, I made creation so it could adapt to different conditions. And that's basically his big contribution. By finding human skulls over the last 200 million years, you can see a definite, there's gaps in the record. Everyone agrees that there are flaws or there's gaps in the knowledge, but you can see from the evolution of the skulls that human beings, actually evolved from these humanoids that had smaller brains and bigger jaws and stuff like that. So there are things, we should look at some of the things that
I really want to do that next week, because the reason why we're getting off into confusion is because we're going straight into science, and they've been doing that for 150 years. I can refute every single one of what you've just said by science. So what's the point? What is the point? Martin can come along with a scientist and refute what I say. I can come along and refute what his says. It's no point. We've got to get to the fundamentals. I can say to you about the brain size that an ape has never had a brain size of more than 500 cc, and humans are starting at 750 cc from the pygmies in Australia. Okay, other than that, you've got 800 cc for a human being. There is a gap, and they took that gap and they found the Neanderthal man, which had a brain size of 1,000 cc, but they also knew that he lived for 1,000 years, and so that was deformed. It showed deformed, and he was a human. He wasn't halfway between. And there's a very famous, I'm getting way out of track here, but I just can't, because we can't get into that yet. I want to come into that slowly, Barb, because I can say things like, the one skull, which is very famous, Lucy, the skeleton, and the other one was 1427. I'm sure Martin knows this. And they put everything is put onto this one skull, and the scientist, who was a deep atheist, we know that because he's admitted it, he comes and says later on that he actually found the piece that proved that this ape was hunched over, proving that it was coming from him to the next step of mankind. He found that bone a mile away at 200 feet less deeper than the others, but he didn't tell everybody that at the time. And the actionable atheists, not the atheist scientists who are scientists. I'm talking about the atheists that are rejecting God and have a purpose for that. And I wanted to go into that as well, why we do this, why Christians do it and why atheists do it. They made sure, like I'm a marketer, I know what they're going to do. And well, I don't know what they're going to do, but I know what can happen. And that is they can push something out into the world and depress everything else. And so that's what I believe happened. And because he admitted it later on, and it was defunct by science. But the science establishment, who was run by atheists, and I don't agree. I agree with you, Martin, that I don't know if they're strong atheists or not. But the results from what they did show me that they must have been, because they did not publish the other things. They just published that. And to conclude, or to even further that humans are the issue with their beliefs, and there's a motivation behind beliefs, is that they are now putting in textbooks in schools. I can show you 3 examples, and I've got them ready for next week. 3 examples where school books have put in and they refuse to take them out, and the explanation they have given makes them explain something what God calls, I will confuse their minds or mouths. And what happened, I'll give you one example. The anatomy of a whale. The anatomy of a whale has been known for many, 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 many years. And yet still in some school books, in science books, they insist in educating our children to make sure that the end, it doesn't matter what the means are, lie in the school books to make sure that evolution is the result. And that's the problem. And so what they've done is they've got this whale, and they've talked about these 2 things that hanging off the whale. They didn't know what they were. And they said, these are the remnants of the legs that they lost when the 4-legged animals went into the sea. And of course, they can't survive with just mere legs, and they smoothed them out and everything else. And these are the remnants of them. They put that as fact in the science books. And then, of course, when we found out later on, as someone mentioned, knowledge is changing and more data is coming through, and we could have got more instruments. The anatomy of that whale has been scrutinized by a lot of scientists, and it's all agreed to, all the science is agreed that those 2 things are there. They need to hook on when they're mating, and a reproduction would not be possible if those 2 whales had not those hooks, because they just slip all over the place. And so that was completely refuted. Every establishment of science has agreed with that, and but the authorities of the people who are controlling the science books kept it in, and their reason was, what else are we going to put in to make sure that the kids understand that we are losing the battle? That's what it was. And it really is a battle. And now, so we've gone off the subject of the evolution against creationism. Now we're into another subject of schools. It's a different subject. I agree. It
right.
is a different
and so
subject.
we've got to try and keep it focused. And I'm trying to help bring everybody along step by step. So Kevin, I want to summarize what I think I understand about what you're saying. And then if it's wrong, you and Martin help me out. What you're saying is, number 1, Darwin was an atheist, and that colored the speculating that he did about an origin of a species. Is that one thing that you're saying?
That is my belief, but I would like to know why it's so clear to me. Okay, I'm biased, of course, maybe, but why is that so clear? Why, if God is not in the picture and you're making hypotheses without that, how can it be true?
Okay, well, we don't have the ability right now to get in to the subject matter and to answer that question. I would have to read the origin of a species. What I'm trying to do in this summary point in the middle of your discussion is bring everybody together on the main points that you're making. Whether or not the points are true or can be substantiated by Darwin's actual own writings goes beyond what we can do in this. We're trying to get a grip on what it is that you're saying in the main points. So that's my first point. And what was I correct in saying that was your first point?
Yes.
Okay. So everybody, because Darwin was not a Christian, that colored not his observations of the adaptation of a species, that colored his speculations and his thoughts about the origins of the universe. Okay.
Can I just alter that slightly? Please. He was not only a non-Christian, he was he was blamed God and he was rejected God. It wasn't just I don't believe in God. I believe in God aggressively. That's what he says in his book as well. It comes out in his book.
He was a militant atheist with an agenda.
Yeah, that's what I believe. Yeah.
Okay, that's the first point Kevin is making. The second point he's making, if I understand you correctly, is that we do not have the ability to test some of these theories. For example, whether or not life originally came from a single cell, because that's just outside of our fossil record or our scientific ability to reproduce or to understand. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay, please.
We do now have the ability to understand exactly what makes life. And we know exactly what's in a single cell to produce life.
Okay.
But we can't make it. We can't make it. And the reason why we can't make it, because it's impossible to make. We know what's in there. We know how to make it. We know, well, how is a different story. How is not the right word. We know what's in a singular cell down to the nth degree. And we know what produces life. We know what's necessary to produce life. But we can't replicate it. It's a circular thing because we need oxygen for life to sustain life. We also need oxygen to make life. Sorry, we need oxygen to sustain life, and oxygen is there in any form when we make life. It's necessary to make life, but it kills it as well. It's an oxymoron. When we breathe in oxygen, we're living, but we're also killing ourselves. And that's another theory we're going to go into later on about entropy. But we know exactly what is in a singular cell, but we cannot replicate it because it seems to be something has happened that we can't make it. We just can't make it.
Okay.
And that's another question.
Okay, but I have to clarify. With regards to the theory of evolution, one of the things that evolution is saying is that all life that we know of developed from an initial single cell. Okay, and so what are you saying about that? Are you saying that science can't say that? Are you saying it's not true? Are you saying we don't know that? Or what is your response to that aspect?
Okay, well, we ultimately don't know that. But there is now, which I was going to leave till next week, there's a lot of exciting stuff gone over the last 10 years. And it's called the tolerances, or they don't call it tolerances in science, they call that in engineering. But I don't want to go into that. We're just going to go off track right now. But yes, we don't know. Let's put it that way. We don't know. But there's a lot more science now to let us know.
I'm still
And
summarizing.
your point is that Darwin did not know that either. That part of his theory of evolution was very speculative. And so science has tried to catch up and either prove or disprove it. There are parts of, however, what you're leaving out is there's parts of his natural selection variations that can occur that actually get taken up by the species if it works. That stuff has actually been proven. That's true.
Adaptation.
So rather than just blowing him apart, we should talk about, I know we're going to get there, but this is a very frustrating part of this whole diatribe.
Okay, let me clarify that then. There are two sections for evolution. Stuff that we can see now and test now. And absolutely, I love the science of, we call it natural selection or adaptation or variation. It's wonderful, that science. It excites me. You know that seeds from grains, it's like a war between seeds and birds. The seeds have a covering so that the birds can't when they take it in, they can't absorb it in their stomachs. But the birds are adapting, as you're saying, adapting for more digestive aggression, and so that they peel off that in the digestive system, and then the seeds start to go, okay, they're going to put a bigger, stronger. They evolve into a stronger. Evolve is that word. They adapt so that the genes, or not the genes, the genes, the positive genes that are making a stronger covering get through, of course, and so because otherwise they won't get to be spread out at all. And so it's a war going on. It's a war because look, the 2020 gazelle model is 1.5 times, 1.5 miles per hour faster than the gazelle 100 years ago in 1991. It's a war
Okay.
between the cheetah gets faster and faster.
Hang on. Way too much detail, way off the subject. Okay.
No, I'm talking about natural selection, which
Well,
is true. I agree.
well-
Darwin has got, we can see that and we can prove it.
I'm worried about us getting lost in the details because you have a lot of details that you understand. So I'm trying to establish the outline. I've gone through 2 points. I have more points that's just summary of what all you've said to this point. I need to make sure that we understand what you've said before we can build on it. The third thing I understand you to be saying is that the fossil records, and I know you're going to spend more time with this next week, but the fossil records connected to humans descending from primates isn't conclusive.
No, that's generally agreed by the scientific establishment now.
Okay, so these are key points, because if that is true, then you're saying it's science itself which is undermining the quote theory of evolution. And then, is that correct?
Yeah, there's evolution is now losing a lot of the evidence that's supporting it is going. There's still evidence there that we haven't hasn't been disproved, but that
Now,
one has.
The fourth thing that you're saying is that science, some scientific textbooks operating out of a philosophical agenda to present evolution as a fact have distorted data and tried to make it say things that we know now are not true. For example, why the whales have their little clipper things to hold on when they're mating, because slippery whales can't do the nasty very well without the clipper things.
Absolutely.
Is that
Yeah.
okay? So that's the fourth thing, is that Kevin is saying that some scientific textbooks in some places, and some is an important word, some scientific textbooks in some places, because they're trying to promote evolution as an established fact, are taking examples that actually don't support evolution and trying to make them support evolution. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's not just when I say some, it's vast. It's all over the world. Maybe that particular one, but there's many examples. I can give you more.
Kevin, on that, you're going to have to write up something and then share it with us next week or something like that, because I'm very interested at that, because I did not go through school at a time where science did what it is that you're saying that science is doing now. And I'm not saying that they're not doing it. I'm just saying that I was never exposed to this. So if it is happening, if it is in textbooks that you know of, if it is documented, then show it to us.
Sure,
show
okay.
it to me. Show it to all of us.
That's a good idea.
That's not a statement that you can make and then not substantiate it with a heck of a lot of footnotes. So my point is that Kevin has brought us in the discussion to these 4 points. And does anybody want to question Kevin or make sure that they understand the 4 points before we go into the next section of what he has to share?
I think that some of what Kevin's talking about is not the full picture of what the theory is saying, or it's getting lost in certain details and missing others. So I mean, it's really hard to have a conversation about evolution, parts of the evolutionary theory, without it turning into a semester or 2 long discussion.
Yeah.
Because, there's so much data, and there's so many fossils, and there's so much information about the genetics, and there's so much information that just in order to have a good, factual or at least some sort of research-based discussion, on all these different detailed points. So I think, generally speaking, I understand the points he's trying to make, but I think there's a lot of there's aspects to what he's talking about that are missing. So
Okay.
that's all.
Well, yeah, I agree, and it's difficult. You know, all this has been argued, exactly these points, for many, many years, and the late 19th century theories of science are still going on today, even though science has come a long way. And so that was also, let me just explain that, because first of all, before I do that, before I go there, I just want to answer a question on the adaptation of Darwin. Darwin was absolutely, you know, because Darwin was talking about adaptation, which was observed and is correct. You know, it was correct at the day, it is correct now, it's can be observed, can be tested now, like water can be tested, gravity can be tested, everything else we observe and test today, and then so we can actually observe what's happening now. What we can't observe is, of course, the origins. So the adaptation is yeah, obviously very, very correct. But that's one section that is not disputed. What is being disputed is the origins of life.
Anybody else want to ask a clarification question to Kevin before we move on?
So I wonder if no one's got anything. I want to come back to my survey at the beginning, and Martin wasn't here at the time. But Martin, let me ask you that question. Might as well. What would you say is the main source of calcium in most of the developed world countries today for nutrition? Not pills. What do you think? You don't have to know. What do you think?
The main source of calcium
For most people in the developed world, it's not a trick question. It's a simple question.
My guess would be leafy greens and milk.
Okay, that's it. So we're going to now discuss that to show you a point that we're in 2021. And to really show this point, there's a reason for it. And I'm going to show you why humans involved with these frontier science cannot be trusted. Christians, or I'm talking about both sides. I'm not biased between either. Both Christians and non-Christians. You've got the fanatics, you've got everything in between, and you cannot trust them. So what we have to trust, and this is what Martin was talking about last week, we certainly have to try to trust anyway, that when everybody comes together, it'll be worked out. You know, people will notice that and notice that and notice that and notice that. So, you know, that's why science should be good, even with the different characters and the conspiracy theories and everything else. But unfortunately, it's not. And I'm going to show you two industries where that is being shown because of the human, and this is another science I just want to get into. I want to really point this out because this is the last thing we'll be able to talk about, and that is the human need. And, you know, what's his name? The triangle, the human need triangle. But before we get on that,
Maslow.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So that's one of them anyway. There's several, but okay. So let's take this slowly and discuss why that calcium thing was important. It's been known by the scientific community for many years that calcium from milk, it doesn't give you calcium at all in your body. In fact, it's the opposite. And I'm going to show you the reasons why that is true, and you can check it out yourself. But you're going to have a hard difficulty. And the reason why it's hard is because of the marketers, people like me. I'm a marketer. I do science every day. I do at least 100 hypotheses every week. I've got a table of 12 months with 10 figures. That's 120 figures with different KPIs, working out this hypothesis, getting the trends and getting a result. And I change the hypothesis to get it right. It's all the time. But let me explain about this calcium deal. So what happens in the body when you drink calcium? We all know that pH of the blood, a certain pH is necessary for good health. Just like the pH of water needs to be be perfect for fish to live in. We know that. And we know that for a healthy human, we need a pH of a certain level. And we need calcium for our bones and a few other things. But the bones are like a bank. They take in calcium and store it up. They also give back calcium to the body because it's necessary for certain aspects of the body as well, not just for the bones. So when we take in milk, unfortunately, the pH is completely wrong. And what happens is the milk, the calcium inside milk is not bioavailable by humans. Cow's milk I'm talking about, cow's milk. Mother's milk of humans is perfect for the growing up and is made up of completely different things than cow's milk. When cows grow up, they change from very small cows to massive calves within a few months. And so it's a very, very different composition of milk. So the calcium from the cow's milk is not bioavailable or not bioavailable to our bodies. And what happens is when the milk comes in, it actually steals, because the milk comes in, we say, okay, the body says, okay, we still haven't got enough calcium. We haven't got enough calcium. And so the bones lends its calcium to the body. Okay. Once we get calcium in when we're eating the right foods, like leafy vegetables, like fruits and meat, where we are getting calcium from, and there's plenty of it there if we eat it properly, that's when the bones then take it back. The body doesn't need so much doesn't need so much for other things. So it's like a bank. It gives it out when there's lean times, and then it takes it back from the food when there's good times. And the problem is the cow's milk changes the pH to worsen. It gives it more acidic. And so when it gives it more acidic, then calcium needs to come out of the bones. That's the reason. Sorry, I forgot to put that in. When the calcium is needed to balance the pH, the acidity of milk from cows in our body. And this is the reason scientists have actually plotted this out over many, many years and thousands. I can get I hope to get the test that did this, but you can find it yourself. And that is, they found in the developed countries like Norway, Sweden, Europe, parts of Europe, and UK and US and Australia, where a lot of milk, the highest levels of milk is actually Norway and Sweden. And it's also the highest level of hip fractures. Now, I don't know whether you know this, but hip fractures are the indicator, precursor, or indicator, not precursor, the aftercursor, the indicator of osteoporosis, because they're not pressing down like that on a leg. When a leg presses down, you've got compression. It can take a much more load than if you're on a cantilever and you're going like that, and a lot of force here, cracking it. So hips have a side force as well as a downward force, and it's the indicator of osteoporosis. The highest rate in the world is in the countries that drink the most milk. Now, we're in 2021. That has been hidden by whom? By the people who have more to gain than anybody else. Who is that? That's the dairy industry. There are some, not the farmers, they don't know. They're just selling their milk. But the large, I mean, the dairy industry is a huge industry, billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars. And there's some big players in there. And that's what happens. Now in 2021, with all our laws and regulations and boards that are checking things and all the scientists that are checking things, it does not work. Human greed is the killer for everything. And I'm not talking about human greed for money. It's the same thing as human beliefs are a very, very strong motivator. If you look at the Pavlov's or whoever that was who said that, the triangle, you can see transcending that number top of the triangle is the belief of our belief, and what we believe in is such a strong force. It's not equal to money or greed, but it's up there, right up there with it. And so I just wanted to point that out before I go on next week. My point is that we cannot rely on humans. There's a certain need from humans, certain greed that even today, 2021, scientists, although they know it, they can't suppress it can't suppress the market, the expert marketers who put this out there, and it's let go because of the amount of money they're putting into governments.
So your point is that we don't
trust. We cannot trust humans in any shape or form of anything that's important to them. And one of the most important things to them is money. The other is beliefs.
Kevin, when you say these overarching, huge,
that's why I want. Okay.
Well, but hang on a minute. When you say these overarching, huge, dismissive things like you can't trust humans, I mean, I took Tylenol for my migraine headache, and you know what? I trusted it to deaden my headache, and it helped a whole bunch. I take another medicine, Imigran, when I get a migraine headache, and it neutralizes the migraine at its source. So after 30 minutes, my vision comes back. I'm sorry, but I have to trust the scientists who came up with that. And yes, there might be a marketing ploy that has to do with produce and meat and eggs and vegetables and cheese. And if you want to say that marketing has obscured truth in certain areas, that's fine. But you don't go from that into something that's so global that then it causes people to discount the legitimacy of the particular example that you gave. You follow me?
I think qualifier Kevin was making was we can't trust people super well when, like, basically you have to be careful of trusting the studies that are paid for by the milk industry and stuff like that, right? Like, be careful about when humans have biases and special interests that would bias their conclusion or their studies, which I think is a well established and well embraced point. For everyone, I think, on scientists or not, or Christians or atheists, they all that's just like a solid point of logic. Like, just be careful who's doing the study, because people who are being paid a lot of money or have a lot of financial incentive to fudge the study will fudge the study. And yes, there's an enormous amount of scientific data which is all just paid for, like it's like corporate found people who they could pay to do studies that would tell them what they wanted to hear, right?
Yeah, so that's your point, Kevin.
That is my point. Yeah. So maybe I was over enthusiastic in saying you can't trust anybody. No, I don't. No, I don't mean that. But I'm also saying this, and I will bring up this the chart maybe next week. Of there's not just money involved. It doesn't happen just because of money. There's other very strong issues that people will will say that the means justify the end, because of beliefs. One of them is religion. Religion is one thing. Another thing that's very strong.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop here because it's 9:10. But this has been very fascinating, and I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to next week, and tonight has whetted my appetite to go read Darwin myself and see what it was he said.
Hallelujah.
And Kevin, anything you want to pass on, like the link that you passed on last week? You want to send something to us that we didn't get to everyone else?
Can I do that? I will do that.
Please do that, because that's very helpful.